Dr. Šíma for his organizing all of this. Everyone, the American student here who
My talk today will be about de-socialization in the Austrian school, and just a small demonstration to start up with. Right now, like a few seconds ago, I got a call from Czech TV, and the desperate journalist asked me that the Czech government now is suggesting increasing value-added tax by 1 percentage point. And then the journalist is looking for somebody defending the increase of the tax, and she couldn't find anybody. So she started her little conversation by saying, I know you are against that, but maybe at your school you may have at least somebody who will be willing to come to the evening news to say there is something good about it. And I said, sorry, I can't help you. So there is some effect which the transition still has on how more state and heavier taxation is viewed in this country, and I guess it's very good, and hopefully it'll stay so for some time. What we so far talked about is the essence, nature of economics. It was very nicely explained by Professor Vedder that the science of economics is about the magic of self-organization. That we all inherited that from Adam Smith, and there were even authors before him, but he is known as a founding father of modern economics. By no means a narrow-minded economist. He indeed was a moral philosopher and economist on top of it, which was typical for economists over the centuries. In England, it was more a combination of moral philosophy and economics. In places like France or Austria, or Austrian monarchy, was more like that economists were lawyers and economists, which is true for all the people, the founders of the Austrian School of Economics. We again already mentioned, and I will add a few things to it. So I want first to make sure that everybody understands that economics is a beautiful science developed by people who were not obsessed by some macroeconomic data. They were not talking about GDP, but they were talking about how come that without center direction we can together, by following our own interests, but not exclusively, how come that we create prosperity? And what conditions are needed in order to have peace and prosperity? So that the classical liberal story will be about the peace part of the story. How come that we have peace, or under what conditions we have peace? And the answer was, well, private property gives us clear rules how to avoid conflicts, how to generate social harmony. And the economic story is, well, and by the way, if we cooperate rather than fight, we'll be richer. So the whole society is organized, but is not organized by anybody. It is a product, a sort of unintended consequence of our peaceful dealings. And economists historically were exactly those people who explained this thing, which is a little bit counterintuitive. Many people who have their experience only from family life, they cannot imagine that you can have order without a strong father of the family to say what is to be done. Now, economists explain the problem of coordination, meaning in big society. So they very nicely explained, and the Austrians, including Mises and Hayek, were like leading figures in it, explained that we simply have to have different understanding for complex, big, large societies. That we have to understand that when you have a lot of people, different people with different preferences, and you want to allow everybody to follow his or her own goals, that, you know, there must be an explanation how to coordinate and how to prevent waste in big societies, and economists are the ones who are giving the answer. The classical liberal understanding that you need rule of law, property, private property-based social order, and then free economic system on top of it, that sort of prevailed for a century or more. However, then, unfortunately, I would say, competing doctrines emerged, advocating stronger state, be it progressives in the United States, or be it socialists all over the place, trying to suggest a different kind of social organization with strong state, and under socialism or communism sort of ultimately like very powerful, omnipotent state. Economists argue, well, you need, sorry for this, I just learned how to do little tricks with PowerPoint, and then I couldn't stop doing it. You need private property, then exchange, meaning markets, that gives us prices, prices gives us knowledge. Namely, that we, in large societies outside our families, we see the world through prices, and it is the best way, and actually the only way, how to have extensive division of labor in large societies. But then the opposition came and said, no, we have to have the state that does something, and economists said, well, suddenly you change the picture completely. Suddenly you do not have the win-win situation anymore, the thank-you situation, the mutually beneficial exchange, but suddenly you have winners and losers, and this is very dangerous. Losers will not like it, and people will try to move to the group of winners, and that can have long-term, very perverse consequences. You will have a lot of redistribution of wealth, and that redistribution of wealth will sort of continue, and it can completely destroy the engine of growth, of prosperity. Rather than everybody being a king, which what I mean is that production is driven by consumer. It is you who decides in a market setting what will be produced. Suddenly production gets politicized. You have politicization of production. And in our today's reality all over the world, the redistribution is something like 50% of what gets produced, meaning about half of what gets produced is decided not by us, each of us, but by somebody else, allegedly on our behalf. Now, what kind of system is that? And indeed, the debate can be turned into a debate about the use of force. So peaceful dealings versus use of force against peaceful people. Suddenly you see that the debate about governmental regulations and taxation and all the rest of it, it's much more than some sort of economic debate about what creates prosperity and what not. And that is why we need exactly events and seminars and approach like what we do here, where we have economists and historians and political philosophers, because only after seeing the problem from different angles we finally understand. Now, my country was unfortunate that it, after the Second World War, got under Russian Soviet influence, and the ideology of central planning became dominant. So socialism was applied, used in a huge part of the world. My country is a small country, but suffered anyway. Though only very few people sort of expected it in the early days. Indeed, you have people, such as the Austrian school representatives, such as Mises or Hayek, who even before the whole socialistic enterprise was tried, they worked against that, and I'll talk about, and we've already heard about Mises' famous article from 1920 about the impossibility of rational economic calculation under socialism. But like common people very often, when they heard the communist vision, you know, they didn't find it dangerous or problematic, because the goals, like flourishing of human virtue and prosperity, that sounds good. Who can be against it? But the problem was, and this is what Mises talked about, is, well, all right, a nice goal, but how do you want to achieve it? Through nationalization of the means of production. And the argument went, well, we can plan the society from above, and then prosperity will follow. Could that work? And some, such as the Austrians, Mises and Hayek, they warned against that, as I said. Many people needed to see the consequences. And now I have a few pictures here to show you the consequences, little examples from my country, what socialism means in reality. And I believe exactly those small things was the final blow to socialism. That socialism didn't lose because of some theoretical victory or understanding, but because common people saw how stupid the system is, how wasteful the system is, how bad lives these people under socialism and central planning have. Indeed, we are in the Czech Republic, so the first picture is about beer and pubs. This is prior to what's called the Velvet Revolution in 1989, last year of socialism. This is a picture from very downtown Prague, close by here, how the place looked like. And here the same picture a few years later, when we already got property-based, entrepreneurial-driven system production. The same picture, exactly the same setting, same people, by the way. There is very few years in between, and completely different results. Simply, incentives matter. Private property matters. Take a look here. This is a little street, also here, not far from. It's not downtown area, but anyway, socialism. And this is how it looks now. Again, it's not like you still can imagine a better place to live, but there is an obvious difference, and you need to study Mises to understand what system is better. See that? Yeah. Guess what is this? Right? I used to have a car like this as well. When I entered the university in 1990, 1 year after the fall of communism, my parents would give me their used car, which was like this one, not new one, and I had a similar car like this. It's Skoda, Czech-produced car. By the way, a company with great history, did beautiful cars before, but this is how it deteriorated during socialism. Now we still have Skoda now, but you know, it looks better. And again, pretty much the same people produce it. It's still in the same factory. But now, you know, it's a different system. Now they have to produce cars that look like cars. I've heard there was a joke, Britain, US maybe, was how do you double the price of Skoda car? You know the answer?
Fill it with a tank of gas.
Yeah. Okay, so, you know, at least we have now this nice joke. This, you know, socialist car production was useful for something. Yeah, this is shopping under socialism, which was a shortage economies, you know, lines. This may be a little, you know, not typical, but still, you know, people, it says meat and sausage here, so people waiting to get meat. You know, this is like shopping culture today. Again, pretty much, you know, same people, same city, a few years different. Only in the first instance, you know, state production, state supply of allegedly useful goods in an allegedly intelligent way, and you know, modern system of market-driven system, consumers-oriented system. Yeah, a few more. You know, I used to wear one of those as well. These scarves. You know, these were the young, what was it like? Yeah, young socialists became a sort of norm, and you know, we would be forced to sort of celebrate certain things which did not deserve to be celebrated. We would guard a statue of Lenin for no obvious reason. Nobody wanted to steal it. And you know, it was horrible. You didn't see it when you are born to the system and you grow up in the system and your schoolmates do the same. A few weeks ago I came back from China and they still do it, and you know, when I laugh at them they didn't understand what's so funny. So I have to explain. But you know, fun today also means something else. What is this? And now Czech student would know, but for Americans, you know, what is this? What is that?
It's Trabant.
Yeah, so this is Trabant, or Trabi, car produced where in East Germany, same time, same German-speaking population, West Germany and Mercedes. And this is exactly what I meant when I said, you know, you don't need to study Milton Friedman and Ludwig von Mises to understand, you know, that there is something wrong with socialism. Because when East Germans, if by some, you know, happy coincidence they managed to go to West Germany and they saw, you know, people driving different cars, or when West German tourists came to East Germany to see relatives maybe, and you know, the official propaganda was, well, these are cars that, yeah, they produced it, but only very rich people can afford them. Like common people have, you know, pretty much nothing. They suffer and they strive all the time against, you know, capitalism. And for some time you can believe it, especially when your country is sort of like a cage where you cannot cross the border, which was, you know, our case until 1989. You couldn't get to the West. You could go to East Germany, you could go to Bulgaria, but that was pretty much it. And there was no internet at that time. You could get, there was no satellites, at least legally, couldn't have it. The only source of information was about how the life was in the West was radio stations. And even that was the government tried to prevent people from listening to foreign radios by scrambling the signal so that, you know, people couldn't do it easily. And that's why they could believe the propaganda. You know, food and beer was subsidized so that people had incentives to be home, eat sausages and drink beer and watch TV with the propaganda. And you know, or that was the only escape route you had, that you built your family house and you like entertain yourself in the house or in your garden and took care of it yourself, and had kind of a little private island of like no interference from the governmental side, let's say. Yeah. Or you know what is this? Satellite images of Korea. This is North Korea, this is South Korea, this is Seoul. By the way, this is a region of Ulsan. I've been there last year. It is a headquarter of Hyundai Motor. If this was a country, that would be something like the third richest country in the world. They have like GDP per capita $60,000. All this was in 1950s as poor as the poorest countries in Africa. So in terms of GDP, it could be like $100 in 1955. And now this part is 60,000. So from 100 to 60,000. It's a huge improvement. Now guess why is that? And what's actually interesting is that, let's say, people in China, and this is the city of Shenyang where I was a month ago, you can nicely show them this and they understand. They understand that trade is good, that open borders are good. They only think that, many of them think that you need strong government, like, on top of open borders, and that they gave you, the government gives you the goodies. But when you explain to them that there are rich places with no communist party in charge, they immediately get the message and they understand. But they are kind of being brainwashed into believing that open trade and all that is good, but we have something to control for the reason to sort of speed up the development. Okay, so the point here is, well, institutions and incentives matter. Private property matters. Same people, you have same people and different results. East Germany, West Germany, South Korea, North Korea. Or Czech Republic before the Velvet Revolution and after the Velvet Revolution. And this whole debate is what also Professor Lebar talked about, the debate between top-down and bottom-up. Indeed, it is important, and it is in the sort of human nature to think about the future and to plan. So this whole argument that socialism is bad and is evil is not about we do not need planning. We need planning, but the question is who is doing the planning? Who is thinking about the future? Who is risking the money? Who is trying to satisfy future needs? And indeed, this is what free market economists led by Austrian say, well, yeah, individual planning, that's what we need, versus central planning. And you can again transform the debate into the follow-up debates, like the so-called political means versus economic means, which is a terminology used by Franz Oppenheimer. Political means meaning the use of force and coercion to take from other people what is theirs and give it to somebody else. So that's what politics is about. Versus economic means, which is completely different and superior approach, because it boils down to a situation in which you say, wouldn't you want, please buy what I have just produced? And if you do, if you want to buy, well, this is the price of it. So are you willing to exchange with me or not? So it's not, hey, give me this and I may build for you a highway. No, this is, hey, I risk my money. I thought about the future and I think you might need this. Was I right? And when I sell It means I was right, I get profit, I get wealthier, happier, and my on the other side of the exchange, somebody who was buying is happier and wealthier as well. So this mutual beneficial exchange, it seems to be simple, but it's essential feature of a market system, and it's important never to forget about the distinction between coercion, voluntary exchange, political means versus economic means, or competition and monopoly. In one situation, you can supply legally whatever other people want, so peaceful producers sell to peaceful buyers, versus somebody has a special privilege by the government, and if you dare to compete, police will be sent after you and you will be put to jail. And indeed, the Austrians, as we have already heard, were a crucial line of thought that started by Karl Menger in the second half of the 19th century, with the school started with this famous debate about economic method. In principle, as many of you know, the Austrians were saying, well, economic laws are laws that are true and valid always and everywhere. So there is universal application of it. Once you understand something, then it's good for the 19th century and the 20th century. It's good for China and America. It's good for Africa and whatever other place. So, and you actually, again, you can devote the whole life studying the essence of economics and try to understand better the debate between those who say the laws are true forever versus, which was the German historical school, people who say, well, not really, you have different kind of laws, different economics for different situations. So you can approach it in a sort of scientific way, but also you can do it in a rather primitive way, like read Adam Smith, who gave us understanding, and you will be amazed how contemporary the understanding is. Versus take some of the books written by German historical scholars like Schmoller and read it. You will not understand a thing. It will be completely outdated. It would not make sense. So the point is, good books, good economic books, tell you stories about the logic of social organization. And then, if they are really good, they are good for like forever. 200 years old book can be still read and you will still benefit from reading it. So Austrians are strong advocates of economics, good for all times, good times, bad times, crisis, boom, whatever. After that, and there was especially the already mentioned article by Mises from the 20s, and then the whole book, Socialism, which he wrote and which made him a super super famous scholar in Europe, and then in the rest of the world. Austrians were the first ones who explained why socialism will collapse even before it was empirically sort of tried and proven. There was a great debate between the Austrians. We've heard something about it, Oskar Lange and others. And for many years, it looked like that the opinion of many economists was that somehow the Austrians lost the debate, that after all you could see socialism in half of the world kind of working. Mises said, well, if that's impossible, and suddenly you had it for generations. So wasn't he wrong? And indeed he was not. And indeed, as Professor Weller mentioned, even Paul Samuelson finally understood that socialism is bad. Though in his textbook from mid-1980, he still claimed Russia and Soviet Union will outperform America. And by the way, I'll add a few anti-Klaus stories to my talk as well. Klaus wrote an introduction to the first ever Czech translation of Samuelson, and he said that it's a very thoughtful book which everybody should read, that everybody will benefit from reading, and that the only bad thing about the book is that it doesn't have a chapter on transition. The book which said, socialism, central planning, socialist central planning is creating prosperity, is more efficient system of organization and market-based system which Americans have. And only with the fall of socialism in the late 80s or early 90s, finally most of the people, though there are still some who do not want to agree with that, but today I guess most of the people understand that Mises and Hayek and the other Austrians were right, and that socialism was impossible in the sense that socialism as a system of rational economic calculation. Mises never said you cannot plan. He knew that central planners do the planning. But what he was saying is that they have no way of knowing how to plan rationally, not to waste resources. They don't know how to create prosperity rather than poverty. And so he said, yeah, these people, socialist central planners, will do the planning, but they will plan chaos. So that's why one of his books is called Planned Chaos. So everybody would sort of do the planning, but the rest will be a disaster. And this is exactly Mercedes car versus Trabant. And many people may say, okay, well, socialism is pretty much dead. Nobody wants to try full-fledged socialism and full-fledged central planning. So what's so good about the Austrians now? And here, indeed, there is the third major debate and point Austrians were making, and that is the theory of interventionism, explaining the dynamism of interventionism. Namely, that once you start meddling with markets, you can again do it, but it will never stop after your first attempt to act against markets. That there will always be consequences, and that economists should be the ones, as they had always been, telling politicians, hey, there are no shortcuts. You may believe that a tariff creates more jobs in your country, but this is only because you do not see all the consequences. That's only because you ignore half of the story. So economists historically were experts on sort of stopping politicians, at least warning politicians, from doing things which seem reasonable at a first glance, telling them, well, there are these indirect consequences, unintended consequences, or invisible consequences, or consequences which is difficult to attribute to what has just been done. But by logic, by understanding what's going on, there are bad things happening, and hence we can use the Austrian understanding to explain why is it that we have such a mess in provision of health services or schooling or Why is it so much waste in building highways or do whatever what the state does? And remember, we are not talking about small government which is redistributing like few percentage points of GDP, which used to be at some point in the late 19th century kind of norm. We are now talking about huge governments, huge bureaucratic apparatus, and a huge number of people who spend other people's money. By the way, when we had Milton Friedman over a couple of years ago, and he was delivering a talk, and he was asked to sort of summarize the most important contribution of his, Friedman would say, well, forget about all these sophisticated things about money and inflation. All key understanding in this one simple sentence, nobody spends other people's money as carefully as his own. And this is the essence, and I guess it's very true. You may play with some complicated models and think of situations and different have different assumptions about many things. But when we talk about how to understand what is government doing, when journalists ask us, well, shall we increase value-added tax or income tax in order to balance the budget, then I guess the answer is, well, no, because they will waste the money. They don't know how to do good, even if they want it. So the good thing about Austrians is that their teaching is timeless. And that's why always in times of crisis you see a growing interest in the Austrians. It was true during the stagflation of 1970. It is true today during the crisis. It was true after the fall of communism in the Czech Republic, when people like President Klaus were using Austrian Mises and Hayek's ideas to educate the public, saying, okay, well, we tried socialism, you see how much disaster it was. Now let's move towards something better. Let's de-socialize. Let's privatize. Let's give the property back to people from which the property was stolen. Let's open up. Let's have a rule of law, meaning have as much private property and functional justice as possible. And he played a great role in this, meaning current President Klaus. And he brought those names of Austrians, Mises and Hayek, but also indeed Friedman and also indeed James Buchanan, to the general debate. Very few people ever before heard these names. And he was writing articles and talking to people, explaining that, it is good to have businesses and profits and private property and private owners. In my country, the Czech Republic, there was pretty much no private property whatsoever. In some countries, such as Poland or Hungary, indeed the big factories were nationalized, but at least they had small shop owners or there were small farmers. So there was this concept of doing small business and selling and making money and losing money, whatever. But here, we didn't have it. You could, I guess there even was no use of the word private property. There was a word like personal property, being like your shoes or whatever, your car. But it was called personal. And then the rest was state-owned. So it was a huge task for politicians at that time, early 1990s, to transform completely nationalized system into private property-based system. And Klaus and others did a great job of explaining that it is necessary, that it is needed, and that there is no other way. And he was so good in that, that he became kind of star in a sense of being celebrated as one of the most successful politicians who ever transformed an economy, or who was a leader of transition, put it this way. People like Roger Douglas of New Zealand, who did similar transition, transforming New Zealand from a sort of European Union style welfare state into one of the freest economies in the world. Roger Douglas was happy that Klaus endorsed his book, and he was sort of brought, Klaus, into this first league of reformers. Would be like, you had maybe Ronald Reagan in America, Margaret Thatcher, Roger Douglas of New Zealand, and now Klaus. He traveled the world and was giving wonderful speeches about the beauty of markets, and he's a very good speaker. So a lot of people liked him, and it has even some sort of funny consequences. Professor Vedder would know, before the Fraser Institute did the index of economic freedom, there was an index, I guess it was by Heritage at that time, done not as it is done now, but was like opinion poll among economists. So they asked many top American economists, would you give us a rank of countries from the freest to the least free? So it was more like a beauty contest, not based on hard data. And at that time, like mid-90s, because of Klaus and his fame, Czech Republic was like number 5, if I'm not mistaken. It was like New Zealand, Switzerland, Hong Kong indeed, and then US, and then right Czech Republic. And at that time, like all major banks here were state-owned. We had, we reduced the distribution, but it was still huge. Like half of the economy was still in state hands. All the network industries for all utilities state-owned. But in the eyes of many American economists, Klaus was like, they thought we have like private roads, and we don't have central bank. I don't know what they thought. But it demonstrates how powerful kind of message he was spreading around the world about what is happening in some countries of the former Soviet bloc, led by the Czech Republic. And I mentioned here an article I wrote with my colleague Dan Šťastný, who is giving the next talk. We wrote this article, Laissez-faire Fable of the Czech Republic, published in the Journal of Libertarian Studies, so it is some time ago, in which we sort of explained that it is, in one sense, very good to have, a prime minister or finance minister or president, a leading politician who actually understands that markets are good, who is not saying these stupid things like Obama, recently, we've built it and all the nonsense. So it's good, but actually there's a great danger to it. And the danger is in the fact that when you have a huge divide between rhetoric and actual policies, you may have a real big problem, because the economy was, at that time, in the case of Czech Republic, still half socialist, put it this way. A lot of things were done, but these things were done pretty much the same way in other countries, in like Poland and Hungary and other countries where they didn't have a leading free market theorist as a president or prime minister or finance minister. So they had like semi-socialist, whatever, Obama-style leaders who also privatized a little bit, because everybody knew that socialism was a disaster and something had to be done about it. And they also didn't have courage to privatize many things which should be privatized, starting from banks to utility providers. So the actual policies of the Czech Republic were not very different from actual policies of Poland and Hungary and other comparable countries which have socialists or social democrats in power. And indeed, there will be problems when you do not do transition toward market economy properly. If you have such was the case of the Czech Republic, all major banks state-owned, and you actually declare as closely that it was a part of the transformation strategy, that you needed state banks because the state could push them to finance companies so that companies would employ people. And this is good to have employment. Then you see that after a while, sooner or later, you will learn your lesson, namely that all banks got bankrupt because this politically motivated lending simply was not good investment, and the banks lent out money but didn't get anything back because the companies were bad, they were not selling anything meaningful. So then, only in late 1990s, so 10 years after the fall of communism, big Czech banks were privatized by social democrats actually. Why? Because there was no other ways. They needed foreign investors to buy them, but first the state had to refinance them all. So taxpayers paid a huge price for the fact that the economy was not fully privatized in the early days. So, but the difference between Czech Republic and other countries which didn't have Klaus in power was that here people blamed like the doctrine of classical liberalism, the doctrine of Austrian school. They blamed it for the failure of banks because they thought, well, what we did in the 90s was some kind of application of the Austrian school, and libertarianism, or you name it, which was not. It was still half socialism, half privatization. And then when the consequences happened, problems, banking crisis and all the rest, they blamed liberalism, which indeed was not responsible. So in this sense, it is good to have socialists in power, like Obama, because then you blame the right person for your problem. You blame the right doctrine for your problem. You have somebody who says, let's, regulate and state must do many, many things. Then indeed, it's very inefficient, it goes bankrupt, whatever. And then people see, okay, well, maybe, it's not such a good idea to have so powerful state. But in my country, a wrong thing happened. People for many, many years blamed classical liberal solutions and markets for problems of semi-socialism because they believed it must be, the classical liberal ideal, because that was what Klaus was talking about all the time. And the last thing I want to mention is, then we did privatization, and the beauty of Prague and the quality of life is an example or a real effect of what has been done 20 and 15 years ago. So you see that life got better dramatically, and that there is a huge part of the economy driven by profit-seeking entrepreneurs, and you have huge wealth creation and all the rest of it. Indeed, you still have horrible sectors from healthcare to education, still either fully socialist or semi-socialist. But that's what you have in America as well, and many other countries. But then, disaster came, and that's called the European Union. In the early days of Czech transition, it was kind of slogan like going back to Europe. So now Soviet Union is dead, we ended this experiment with planning. So where to go? Well, back to Europe, where we belong. Okay, well that's a good slogan. Let's go back to Europe, like to Western, ideas, values, and so on. Forget about Marxism and all the rest of it. But somehow people forget about the distinction between Western values and like quality of life and all the rest of it, and European Union as a political process or politically driven process of European centralization. And they somehow believe it is the same thing. So, that we have to become members of the European Union and later become members of the Euro, which we finally are now members of the monetary union. But even people like Klaus, our president, who is very famous opponent of European Union, he said, well, there is no other way, we have to become members. And he actually did his best to be the one who brought the Czech application for EU membership to Brussels. I don't know exactly, we should ask him why he did it, but slowly but surely, many things which could easily be done in the early 90s, like do many activities without state license, got licensed again because it was the way how the European unification process operated. And with every conference on the EU level, more and more things become regulated, and for more and more things you cannot use veto power of individual states. On more and more things it is voted, and then classical majority vote decides what will happen. If people only knew, like 10, 15 years ago, how much things will be regulated by the EU, they would never ever be in favor of it. But it is a piecemeal process. So it's always like, okay, well, it is just this one thing, and maybe that will be it. So people sort of swallow it, and then the next thing comes, and then the next thing comes, and this goes on and on and on. When I, went public and I attended many debates on TV and like against the European membership, I said, well, it will be a disaster. It's a Pandora box. It doesn't. It's like it's hugely dangerous. The process of political centralization and bureaucratization and all the rest of it. The argument against was, hey, what are you talking about here? The overall number of bureaucrats in Brussels is smaller than the number of bureaucrats working for the mayor of Paris. So it's just nobody. And it was true at that time. They started small, but they keep growing, and they will be growing. You know, and you see how much the situation gets worse in countries that have at least freedom ideas associated with origin, like United States. I always use the example of American income tax. Well, the American income tax, first unconstitutional. Okay, then the advocates said, well, let's have it, but it will be a small, tiny tax, single digit, on a very small fraction of population. It is just, we need it because we have to finance certain activities with foreign policy, and we have to pay for embassies, so the few rich people will pay for embassies. Okay, well, maybe. Well, then we'll start small, and your income tax, American income tax, would put in place in 1930. The top rate was 7% at that time. Within 5 years, it was 77. Within a few more years, it was over 90%. From a small tax on few people, you got a massive universal tax and the people's perception sort of gets used to it. So when reforms like what Ronald Reagan did are suggested, like, oh, let's lower something what was unconstitutional, nobody really wanted, and which the advocates wanted only to have in single digit, let's lower it to 28. This is considered to be crazy libertarian. And there is only what, like 70 years in between, so like 2, 3, whatever that is, generations. What was completely unthinkable and and crazy for grandparents to have income tax, and what was sort of crazy to have it like higher than 7% for the next generation. Now it's like the perception is simply that now you do not even think that it could be possibly unconstitutional. You don't even think that it could be in single digit. Now 28 is too low for many people. And then when Bush, what did he, lowered it to 33 or something? That was considered to be horribly low. So, but it takes at least a century before people get used to bad things, before the system deteriorates. In Europe, we don't have this concept of liberty associated with the origin of European Union. It is wholly politically driven system, centralization process. You don't have defenders of freedom. You have all kind of groups of like pressure groups and different lobbies and different interventionists who want maybe different regulations originally, but then somehow they made a deal that, all right, you do your regulation and I support you, and then I do mine, and we'll be fine. So what I want to emphasize is that the process of deterioration of the system, the consequences of political centralization are much faster here in Europe. And you see how fast this goes. We're not talking about several generations. It's like it's happening in front of our eyes. Out of many currencies, suddenly you have one currency, and then the one currency goes to hell within like years. Right? And this is true for everything else. We just do not see it as well in many other areas, or we do not realize it's so bad. So there is a lot to dynamism of intervention. Is what's happening next. And Austrians like me were very good in always stressing this. It's not important that much like the first, but to think about the next one and the next one. It is what makes you understand what is happening. And after a sort of promising start in this country, when communism collapsed and we had a few years of sort of freedom, now it's, though the still increasing standard of living, there is a huge danger of political centralization, which is underway. And I guess nobody knows how far it can go. And it's not only about economics, but it's also about like social harmony in Europe. Ludwig von Mises wrote this nice book, Nation, State and Economy, in 1990. He was at that time writing about Austrian-Hungarian Empire, saying that if you have multi-ethnic or multinational state, it is very dangerous to have centralized government, because decentralization will create hatred among those groups inside the society, because some people pay for other people's benefits. And it is then very easy for a populace to say, well, everything bad, what we have to suffer comes from somebody. And we in the Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia experienced exactly this situation, when for some time there was an increasing hostility between Czech and Slovaks. And Czechs said, well, why are you complaining? We are subsidizing you. You are poor. Money flow from like Prague to Bratislava. And Slovaks said, well, but you don't allow us to do things our way, and all the problems are because of you. So they always have an excuse. They blamed all bad things on Czechs, and Czechs blamed many bad things on Slovaks, and people started to hate each other. Then, and it's again a story about Václav Klaus. He said, "Well, it doesn't lead anywhere. It can be very dangerous. So why don't we split?" And he led the process of splitting the country into two, and that solved all problems. Now Slovaks can't blame Czechs for anything because, Czechs have nothing to do with their problems, in principle. So the point is, which Mises emphasized, like decentralization or secession is a very good thing. It creates peace. Centralization is an engine of hatred, of conflict, and ultimately of war and killing. And this is also something we should not underestimate in Europe. So it's not only about regulations and the thing that we can't use light bulbs today because it's illegal, and if you want a light bulb you have to smuggle it from China, and these crazy small things. But it's about these processes that are far more than economic processes. We are talking about, on the one hand, peace, on the one hand about prosperity and poverty, but on the other hand about peace or war.